Welcome to the show. I am so excited you are here and joining us today and Mind Your Autistic Brain. This is the first event in our series, Autistics in the Workforce. I am joined today by my teammate on the NeuroDrive team, Miss Carrin Gilmore, who is the director of Accommodations. Welcome to the show, Carrin. So glad you're here with me today. And our very special guest, Miss Emily Elsworth. You guys, if you've been listening to Talk Show for a while, you've heard Emily at least twice. She is fantastic. She is the founder and principal of a company called Emily Autism Me in the United Kingdom. And she talks all about and trains around accessibility, specifically in public spaces, museums, and the workplace. Today, our topic is accommodations, accessibility, and needs. Ladies, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right,
Carole.
We are going to kick it off with some of our questions here. So first, let's start with what are accommodations, accessibility, and needs? So Carrin, this is sort of your thing here when we're talking about accommodations. Your background is in special education in particular. What does it mean just when we hear the word accommodations?
Well, I think accommodations are basically the idea of making sure everyone can get to the same place. Like in education, students need accommodations so they can better learn. It's like, oh, they're not able to get it this way. Let's try this route. It's like, let's do this. Let's give them this tool, this idea, this, way to better learn. And the workforce accommodations is actually the same thing. It's, hey, this employee, they're not able to get it. They want to. Why don't we give them this tool, this trick, this way to better work? Accommodations is the idea of honoring our needs in a workplace or at school and kind of setting everyone up to succeed, right? Like you don't want to hurt somebody. So it's like, let's give them an accommodation. Let's work with them. That makes sense.
Oh, it totally does. And I love that. I love the way that you described that. Emily, you are the accessibility go-to person in this field. I mean, you are really good at this. And one of the things you and I've talked about in the past when we're talking about accessibility is some of the things that we just don't think about when it comes to access. So what is just a really good way that you like to describe what accessibility is?
I think for me, accessibility, it can be anything, but it doesn't need to be about knocking down buildings and rebuilding them from scratch. It's not a costly thing. It's simple little things that actually will benefit everybody. So I think accessibility, it's not this huge thing. It can feel huge when it is beneficial for you, but it's those little things that actually, when put together, make a whole lot of difference.
That is so true. And I think that same statement applies across the board, especially as we're talking about our needs as humans, regardless of our neurotype, regardless of what our ability or areas and zone of genius and our skills are, we all have our own unique needs. And that's different from person to person. And I think, one of the great things that I loved, if you guys were following along on social media this week with the Mind Your Autistic Brain and the NeuroDrive team, Carrin had a great thing that she brought up in one of her quotes, and it was about reasonable accommodations. That statement, that phrase, reasonable accommodations. And I think that probably rubs a lot of us the wrong way because the word or the term reasonable really creates, because it's subjective, let's just be honest. I mean, it's reasonable to whom, right? Who is this reasonable to? And if we're looking and we're talking about needs, and we all have needs, we have to have access to the things that support us to do our very best work in the world. We have to have our needs met, be that through self-accommodation, through formal accommodation, those things that are being provided for us and to us and by us. So guys, as we're moving into this pretty big topic here, we're kind of biting off some big stuff. And I love that you two are the ones for this one. You got big stuff. How do you know what accommodations would support you best at work? So Carrin, why don't we start with you on this one? So how do we start to identify? Because you and I have done some things, and you've done some amazing work in helping me and our entire NeuroDrive team start to identify, well, what are our access and our accommodation needs? Where do we start with that? Like, if somebody's listening today, like, what are some questions they could start asking themselves to uncover this? Because sometimes, like, the folks like me with alexithymia need a little help from folks like you, Carrin.
Well, I'll say, I think having someone to talk to is really helpful. We were talking about that too, because it was like I went to the team, and I'll start with my own accommodation story with work. Is I have a disorder where it flares its head, it doesn't hide itself. I can mask my autism, but I can't mask my other one. And so I began seeing what worked and didn't work, trial by error. And it's not really the best route to go. So like something I started asking myself was this worth it? What worked? What didn't work? And I think conversation, right, with people. For example, like when Carole and I had met, I was like, well, what helps you best succeed? What do you define as success? What is going to make your needs felt well? What needs can your workplace provide for you? What needs is your workplace not providing for you? How can you get those needs met? Is it by an email basically giving you everything you need for the Zoom meeting? You know, is it when you break down, I'm going to steal Carole Jean's accommodation for us, right? When you send out an email, it has everything we need in this one document. It's a one-stop shop. Accommodations is such a broad thing, and everyone thinks it's so difficult. You know, people are like, it's so hard for people, and yet it's not. And I think that's where people are like, oh, I have to spend this money. No, accommodation can be something as simple as an email, a document that's designed to help people succeed. So I guess kind of looking inner. I think the thing I would ask everyone to do firstly is look into yourself, right? That inner reflection, and then kind of start questioning the world, questioning how it's working for you, learning your own needs. And something we do is just kind of creating a list. I mean, I did this with doctors and everyone. It was like we started creating lists of what worked and what didn't work, which was really funny because my neurologist would always laugh because she's like, I really thought that worked. Or she's like, how does that work for you? But it works. So I think really having a place, or even just talking it out to yourself, which my poor husband, I do all the time too, right? Where I'm like, blah, 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 all to myself. But, you know, just having that conversation, thinking about it really helps. And then I know Carole and the team had talked about it after this conversation, something lit. You guys started noticing it more, right? So just by talking about it, just by putting it in the forefront of your mind, questioning, are my needs being met at work? How can I, not your work, I get my needs met, right? Because it's your needs. It really becomes an empowering kind of process that I found really helps people out, you know? So just kind of process through it and be okay. Don't self-judge. I can't tell you how many times I beat myself up for things I needed. You know, like having to work from home. I used to be so angry at myself as a SPED educator. I was like, I should be in the classroom. I'm failing people. I'm not able to do what I need to do. And yet I'm not. Like, I work completely online. I'm I think a pretty decent virtual teacher. And so I think just making sure to not only realize your needs, but kind of cope and be okay with them too. Like, you're not lesser because you need these things. These are just needs that you need. So thank you for asking that.
Oh man, that is such a big component to that, is the not judging yourself. It's a little harder too sometimes, I think, because we have this internal, judging model. Sometimes it's our voice, sometimes it's someone in our life, it's their voice. Sometimes when we tune into that talk radio show in our head. So Emily, sort of the same question to you, but in the accessibility market of this, the aspect of it, how do we start to, or what are some questions? Because, that our environment is such a huge thing. One of the things I put in a post this week, how are you going to concentrate and type if you got like a gnat or a bug like zapping and flying around your head? It's going to drive you crazy. You're not going to concentrate and really do the level of work that you need to do. So our environment is a huge component to that. And, you started us off with, look, it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to like tear down the whole building and start from scratch kind of thing. So where do we go from there? Like, as a company or as a public space serving people with all different needs and accessibility needs, where do we start with that, Emily?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's looking at the individual. I think there is that phrase, isn't there, of accessible for all. And like, as much as I would love that to be a thing, and it pains me to say that it's not, like, you're never going to be accessible for every single person. Even on this call, I bet all three of us have got things that would conflict with each other. Um, so it's about looking at the individual, kind of what can you do to the environment? Do you have quite a high number of percentage of your employees who maybe need a darker office? Could they work in one office together? So it's kind of, is that how you could do it so that it's working with them? Again, you will find people use a trial and error thing that Carrin was mentioning. I'm not a big fan of it, but I know it's where most employers will go with kind of accessibility. So yeah, looking at each individual, what are their needs? What do they need to be able to thrive in that environment? Do they even need to be in the office environment? If working in an office is the worst thing in the world, why can't you work from home? Um, COVID has been bad for a lot of things, but one thing is proven we can work from home. I'm sure we're all doing it on this call. So I think it's, start with the individual, work out kind of where you can go. Is there something that you can make that would be broad? Is it that you can adapt the environment on certain days so that the office is a suitable environment on certain days? Working out those questions of what can you do, and just starting big with, well, what do we need to do, and put everything down there. It's never going to happen. You're never going to have a fully inclusive environment, a fully accessible environment. But if you're making those steps, then you're showing that you care about accessibility. I'm not for 1 second saying like group everyone together into like things, but just find those needs that kind of work together. Because I know that schools do that sometimes, and it really irritates me. But workplace, you don't need it in the workplace if you've had it at school. So yeah, finding those needs. What are the similar ones? Can those accommodations just be made and those accessibility things be made all the time? It doesn't need to just be something you do on a Monday and then forget about it until the next Monday. If that office is open 7 days a week, then accessibility needs to be there 7 days a week.
I love that you brought in a little bit of those. Just stop and look at it. It's not just this day of the week. It's got to be all of the days of the week. And I think as we're talking about and sort of layering just in our need in general, one of the things when we're talking about accessibility, to me, and you and I have talked about this, Emily, it's you have to really get in other perspectives. You can't just have three people with very similar needs all trying to figure out what the accessibility challenges might be in your environment. You really need to go outside and ask and invite people in with different access needs to go, hey, okay, we need somebody who is in a wheelchair. We need somebody who maybe has dyslexia. We need those people to come and go through our environment and tell us where those barriers are coming up for them. Because we are not, if we're looking at it through our lens, not going to see these. And it's not because we're not trying to see them, it's because we don't have the right lens to see it. Right? So how do we start, in Emily, on this kind of this layer of this question, how do we start inviting people in, and how do we start creating that conversation to get that help that we need to make sure that our environment is accessible to as many as possible?
Yeah, I think so. There's a bit of a buzzword in the UK. I don't know if it's the same anywhere else, of co-production. Everything has to be co-produced over in the UK. So I think, I'm not for a second saying that co-production is bad. It just seems to be everywhere. So kind of, if you are a service that works with lots of people who you employ, maybe you have volunteers, maybe you have service users, bring them in, ask them, what can we do to make this site accessible to you? What could we do to make our programs accessible to you? Rather than, like you say, making those assumptions, but just, even if it's a thing on social media, LinkedIn, do a poll. What would make this more accessible for you? Would it be this, or this? just really, I mean, I've done it on Instagram before. I've just done a poll. If I want to find the answer to a question of would this work for you, just, social media is everywhere. The internet is kind of this big thing. Use it to your advantage for this. Get to speak to those people. Go out into communities and community centres or venues and ask people, what would work for you. And don't be scared to have those conversations. I think
you read my mind on that one. I'm like, that's the thing. Don't be afraid. Like you can't really do it wrong if you're at least trying. You're showing up, right?
Absolutely. If you said, "Oh, I'm going to go to this community centre and I'm going to ask about accessibility," and didn't turn up, maybe I'd be concerned then. But if you're going and you're asking those questions, I think anyone that asks me a question about accessibility, I'm immediately like, I like this person. Even if what they've said has been a little bit questionable, I always go, I like this person because they've asked and they've gone down that route. Yeah, I think, and I know a lot of people are scared and they come up to me and go, I'm really nervous to ask you this. I'm like, why? Go for it. I've probably heard worse. So yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. That's so true. Okay, so ladies, we're going to dive into like the really big question, the big one that everybody has, and that is self-accommodation versus formal accommodation. Like, when do we do it? How do we do it? What's the difference? So Carrin, kick us off with this one. This is sort of your zone here. Oh man, we just lost her. She'll jump back in. Here we go. Let's get her in. So, that's a big one. And we get this a lot. I see this question comes up quite often for our NeuroDrive team. And it's, what is the difference between self-accommodation and formal accommodation? And when do I need which one? When do I need a formal accommodation? When do I seek self-accommodation? And how does this work together? So Carrin, kind of kick us off with this one.
I think that both accommodations, in a sense that you have to have your accommodation so you can best set yourself up to succeed, right? I'm a needs-based accommodation person. I don't like the way the business world does it in a sense of reasonable, because it's unreasonable to not have our needs met. And so I would say, firstly, like the why of the accommodation is huge. Secondly, an informal accommodation has to be an honor system. And there are some workplaces that are phenomenal at this. Jessica's culture of preferences, right? That's where that thrives. You have this culture of preferences, and then people's needs are met. And then you only need a formal accommodation, when like something comes up or certain needs. For example, like a lot of people don't know it, but like if you want text to speech, things like that, that's a formal accommodation, because a lot of times, depending on where you are in the world, the country, the states even have different regulations as per state. Some states legally your employer has to provide that tech, other times they don't. So it's really important to note that it sounds funny, but like self-accommodations are an honor system. The formal ones have law behind them. And I think that's why I say it's the why that's so important. And this is going to sound really mean, but also how honorable is your workplace? I've created my own accommodations. A school agreed to it, and then they stopped agreeing to it, and then I had to leave the position. And that's as a speducator, which everyone always laughs. So like, would sped be the most accommodating? But some schools are not. Some schools were phenomenal and went above and beyond out of their way too. So I think that sadly right now with accommodations, it's all dependent upon where you work, the environment you work in, and really what's the next step? Because some businesses sadly believe that accommodations are too expensive. It's easy just to get rid of people who need an accommodation. And so that's where you need that legal component to it. And a lot of them try to force that you only can honor, that I almost call them legal accommodations, you know what I mean? Because I know it's formal, but I call it legal because there's a legal law backing up the reason, the IDA Act, in the Americas, particularly in the United States. But that's why I said that. So like, do you need a law to back you up, or can you have a workplace that's going to honor that? And sadly, right now in the work environment we're in, it's a nasty blend depending on where you work. So some places only will do the legal accommodations, right? Those very formal, they take months, if not years, to get in place. And by that time, many workers are worn out, they're exhausted. I myself was a great example of this, right? I was like, I needed it quicker, which I won't get into my spiel about how I won't do it. I won't do it to you, Carole. But I will say on that frankness that like, I feel like this is the problem also with accessibility, is that why do we have to have laws to hold people accountable, right? Like it should be something we just do. I feel the same thing with accommodations. There's lots of intersectionality between accommodations and accessibility, but I'll end it on this note. Formal has a law, you know, your personal ones you've come up with, things you agree to, don't. And so just really, I hate having to say this, but like it really depends on where you work. I wish I could tell everyone, yeah, you can make your own accommodations, make that amazing list, you go, you rock, your workplace will honor it, they're going to want to represent you, stick up for you. But in the work environment we're in, it's such a spectrum that I cannot just say that as a blanket statement. I want to one day though, so that is my goal, right? I'm like, I want to be able to be like, here's how it goes. So yeah, I think that is something we have to work on, and it's more a shift of kindness and compassion that people forget. Accommodating someone else, you know, making sure their needs are met, is compassion that's missing in the workforce.
Oh, absolutely. That is so true. And just having our human to human compassion and kindness and understanding. So, Emily, when you're looking at this, you know, in the UK and in the work that you're doing, where are you guys defining, where are you sort of navigating formal accommodations and self-accommodation?
So this is really kind of interesting for me because I think we don't really talk about self-accommodation. I think we just, like for me, I just do it. Like I know that if I have to get through a working day, I just put them in place. Otherwise, I wouldn't get through. Well, sometimes I don't get through a working day, but that's another story for another time.
Especially if you have to get on the bus.
Yes, public transport's not my friend. I hate public transport. It needs to improve massively. So yeah, self-accommodations would, yeah. So I'd say the more kind of like formal, kind of legal accommodations, I suppose the ones that are talked about more because they're the ones that you really have to push for. And I think there's sort of an expectation that you have those self-accommodations because you know there's all the systems kind of in place, like access to work, which is kind of like a government thing where somebody comes in and assesses your workplace and sees how accessible it or not, in most cases, it is for you. And I think there's this feeling, even though your employer is supposed to make those formal, reasonable kind of adjustments, it's not really, that's not supposed to be supported by access to work. But I think there is this whole thing of everything seems to lie on, well, once you get access to work, everything will be fine. And it's not. I mean, I've just been through, it's a 5-month waiting list currently for support. Like, what happens? Well, I know what happens because I've just experienced it. If it takes too long, is you leave. So it's not, yeah, I think everyone seems to put all this weight on, oh, it needs to be somebody else who puts those formal things in place. And you just sort of, it's not talked about that you do those ones for yourself. But it's almost, I don't know, is the saying the elephant in the room, like the thing you don't talk about?
Yep, that's exactly what this is, the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
So often.
Yeah, that's
so,
kind of what self-accommodations are.
Yeah, in a lot of ways they really are. And you know, this is sort of, as the alignment director in the NeuroDrive team, this is the aspect, because my focus and my particular area, zone of genius, as I call it, is autistic burnout, ADHD burnout, our neurodistinct brain in burnout. And one of the biggest contributing factors to being on that chronic cycle loop of burnout, where you're off of it, you've restored just a little bit, just enough, and you go back to quote unquote life as usual. And few weeks, few months later, you're right back where you are. back in Burnout. And it goes to autism and burnout, neurodistinct burnout, to say it's just autistic, because I'm also autistic and ADHD, and I know people who are dyslexic and who are just strictly dyslexic also experience this. So our neurodistinct brains experience a lack of having our needs met consistently over time. When our needs go unmet consistently over time, we get into burnout because our body and our brain are responding to stress, to overwhelm, to chronic exhaustion. And for those of us who are fortunate enough, because know that our unemployment rate and our underemployment rate is 80% or more, and it's just absolutely unacceptable and ridiculous, which is why we have the neurodistinct workforce movement, folks, because one of the biggest key components is getting your needs met. Number one, being able to identify those for yourself. I did my 90-minute burnout workshop presentation at Autscape on Tuesday, and I went through the top 30 needs for all humans. It is not like a neurotype thing. And I also have some that were specific, but a lot of times we aren't even aware that we need something because we've gone so long without ever having it met, that we don't even know that we need it because we've just been struggling and suffering for so long. It's quote unquote become normal. And I think a lot of what we're talking about and what the three of us and many more, including the NeuroDrive team in our community, are working toward is shifting the belief around, well, what's normal? What's acceptable? So, Emily, I've got a question for you, and I would love to hear a little bit more about your insights on this one. So with accessibility, how does a business or an environment, a museum, a public space, the bus transportation system, and Ashley says she bets you a $5 or she probably hates it more than you do. Then how do they, if you are the owner and you have a business and you're serving the public or you're just serving your staff, you're an internal organization, how do we start to, like, if we're wondering, we're like, oh gosh, is my space, my environment accessible to people? How do they start checking that? What do they do? What do they do first, Emily?
I mean, I suppose there's two stages. There's things, kind of your own research. There are lots of good kind of websites and accessibility checkers that have been set up by people with lived experience of needing kind of accessibility things put in place. And then I would contact, again, those with lived experience, like those of us on this call, any consultant who is autistic or ADHD or dyslexic or dyspraxic, bring us all in. Maybe not all at once, because we'll have a really great conversation amongst ourselves, but probably won't be too productive in any other fashion. And yeah, bring us in, ask us, get us to, in a way that they would like it. Do you want a report? Do you want, a quick kind of photo of, look, these are the areas where you could improve? Or, do you want information from other similar businesses? Maybe better public transport systems. I love that this is where this is going, by the way. Down the route of public transport. Just bring people in. That's what my local council is doing with public transport. I am just going to say that they are actually bringing people in to complain about the issues and the impact. Just bring us in, bring consultants in, bring that lived experience. I know there's so many consultants out there that don't have the lived experience. Please champion those with the lived experience, because we can tell you firsthand what's going on with your organization. We may deliver it, personally, I might deliver it in quite a blunt way, but I'll deliver it.
Emily, I love some of the things that you do, because you're really active when you go to a new space. Like, you went to, I think it was like the Wolf Preserve, wasn't it? One of the wild game preserve places. And you left a comment about an accessibility challenge that you had faced when you visited. And you left a comment on their website. You shared what your access issue was, how they could sort of resolve that. And you went back a year later or within a few months and they had done it. And you were like, this is fantastic. So I think one of the things, like, I think you mentioned this, you talk about it, but I didn't hear you say it. So I'm just going to highlight it here because I think you do this really well. And it's, hey guys, check your comment box. Don't get quote unquote hurt and upset about it. Don't get mad. Like, step back, take a second to go, wow, could we have an access issue? Could we have this? Like, this person is saying to us that this wasn't accessible for them, and that this, and guys, if you are making a suggestion, by the way, don't just say this is the problem. If you know a solution, add the solution, because half the time they're not going to know what the solution is. And then they're going to have to like put that part of the puzzle together to like make it work. So point out, like, do comment if you go somewhere. And Emily is so great about sharing about this. Do comment when you go somewhere and you have an access issue. Also share maybe one or two suggestions for this is how you could solve the access issue. And I love what Carrin brings up, because it doesn't have to be expensive. Most of the time it's free. Most of the time it's just a few moments of your time. And yes, our time is valuable and we do not get it back. But think about the time that the person and the money that you eventually lose over time, because how many people are finding this same problem and not telling you? They're just leaving, or they're not doing business with you. So, little temperature check for that one, folks. Oh no, we lost her again. She'll hop back in. So our next question is, what are areas of our work environment that make a difference to everyone, but are often overlooked? So Corinne, this one's for you. This is because you have such a great like list that you started putting together. You know, I've got those top 30 needs. You've started putting together this wonderful list for our NeuroDrive team. What are some of those accommodations or accessibility things that are just really easy and that really could be available to anyone and everyone, but they're often overlooked? What are some of those most often overlooked accommodations that are super simple that we could start making sure that we're providing for folks?
Well, I think a big one we have to work on is just like I said, like simple things, right? Like meetings. We talked a lot about meetings with the NeuroDrive team because we had to find out our own accommodations for meetings. So I always tell people, I'm like, a lot of business people are like, well, how did you figure this out? I'm like, lived experience. We were like, oh, this isn't working. How do we make this work? I remember originally, Carole was like, we're going to do different times for the meeting so we honor when we all work best. And then all of us are like, Carole, this is murdering our brains, our souls. Like, we need consistency. So I think being open to that feedback, right? And then what do? We have our weekly meetings, and oh my God, we're doing great. I have to get up real early for me, but I'm also the West Coast girl, the only one. But like, I think it's important, right, to honor that I was like, you know what, I'll accommodate NeuroDrive by waking up early, and I love my meetings. I always make the joke, it's like my therapy, like let's make a difference in the world moment. Also, just like a step further is allowing that feedback. A lot of in the States, I've noticed it's called DEIs. We do a lot of DEI committees, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they talk more about these overarching problems in a company when there's really simple fixes that are really easy to do, right? Having that weekly Zoom meeting was something that took you like 5 minutes, right, Carole? You're like, click, done. So I think that that's something also to think about, is that an accommodation doesn't have to be something that's super hard. So I think one is communication. I'll let Allie and Jamie all go into that one later for you, don't worry. But I think that the thing about an accommodation people forget is that it's getting a need met, right? So the email, I can't get over enough how awesome your little Word doc is. So I think just kind of trying to shift it from I have to pay for an expensive thing to do an accommodation to making it an actionable item. A lot of times people think an accommodation is like buying a tech, and it's not. So like, I think my favorite accommodation is use Google Calendar. Like, that's one that my workplace right now I work at, MVA, my virtual academy, they were like, we should use Google Calendar. Ooh, let's think about this, because all the students have Google Calendar. Like, this would be kind of nice. And then all the teachers, we have our own Google, but the company buys Microsoft. So it's been one of those like, hey, like, how could we more streamline a meeting? That's an accommodation that doesn't just benefit me or the neurodiverse employees, but everyone, right? And I think that is, just like she said about it, right, is hugely important. When you have an accommodation, it usually helps a lot of people out. You know, it's like, oh, this person's need talks about it. They bring it up, they're like, hey, I got a problem. Then I was like, wait, I did too. Oh, this works better. I found this a lot in my classrooms where I would work with teachers where they were like, oh, I gave every student a calculator. And suddenly I have no students having, like, the students are understanding and focusing on the math problems instead of focusing on multiplication. Yeah, like, give them a tool. So accommodations are tools. And I think that's what people forget the most, is it's not supposed to be something that you have to go above and beyond out of your way to do. It's supposed to be effortless. I go back to my SPED experience, you know, like in a classroom, the calculator. She just started giving them out to every student so that way kids weren't pointed out. And then those who got to keep them on the test, when kids would ask, she was like, well, this is their accommodation. And it became a discussion about how equity in the classroom is making sure every student is set up to succeed. Workplaces really could learn a lot from that. If you set up every single employee with an accommodation to succeed, such as I've actually seen workplaces do calculators near the register. Sounds funny, but it works great. There's this little hair salon where it's like a hair beauty supply store. And I told the lady, I said, did you think about doing a calculator next to your register? And she goes, girl, I came back because I had to get my new hair dye. And she goes, Carrin, it worked wonderfully. My profits have gone up because I put a calculator near the register because they had to add state tax. And so she made a little thing on their little counter that says the state tax and says, add this to everything. And she was like, 20% increase in profit just from that accommodation. So I wish businesses would understand that accommodations can be profitable. So once you have their needs met, it's profitable. And I went off on a little side tangent, so I apologize. But yeah, I think that it's important to really note that, like, honoring yourself, honoring your employees helps everyone.
Absolutely. And, you know, we talk about our productivity, our bottom line as business owners, because we have to have and generate income to sustain our business, to continue to serve our customers, and to continue to do the things that we do in the world really well. When we are looking at our entire workforce and our environment, the accommodations, the needs, the preferences, and the accessibility, what we're doing is saying we truly are investing in our future as a company. We're investing in our growth, our productivity, and our profit, and the impact that we have in the world, because we know that by valuing these things, and that goes back to like sort of what we'll be talking later about in the month, is the values and the culture that you have. But when those things are thought of as the foundation, what's happening is you're creating and setting up your employees and your business to be the most successful it can be. Because when we have our environment, all people, not just one particular neurotype, but all neurotypes, have their environment that's comfortable for them. I mean, we heard lots of feedback from all neurotypes throughout COVID and people working from home and remotely that it was less stressful. There wasn't as much commute time. There was more well-being. There's a focus on well-being in the workplace. And NeuroDrive team has actually partnered with the amazing XXO Connect to be part of the well-being in the workplace benefits package that is being provided to companies. So if your company isn't part of this, please ask your benefits and your HR department to take a look at, reach out, talk to the NeuroDrive team, let us get you set up. We have a room every Thursday that's live with one of our directors. Sometimes we have two, Carrin and Jamie, team up together to talk about accommodations and translation from neurotype to neurotype. And we are there every Thursday helping businesses, helping employees and employers navigate different brains at work and how to do this. Guys, there are so many resources. This doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be huge. It is not scary. It's what's my need? How do I do this? And by the way, if you're an employer and you're an employee, here's a little insight real quick. Just think for just a second about this. When someone has asked for a formal legal accommodation, number one, that person had to really work up to it. That's scary. because there's so much that we know happens. There's people look at you differently. There's the judging. There's all the stuff, right? There's all the norms, right? So by the time somebody's asked, number one, they've been struggling for a long time. They've come to you very brave, very courageous, and scared, and they are asking for help. When someone has reached that point, the worst thing and what has been happening most often, and I have so many of my executive coaching clients have come in and we've had some of these conversations. I asked, and 3 months, 6 months down the road, I'm still getting an email saying, we're still in a committee talking about this. And sometimes the response isn't actually meeting the accommodation. It's not even solving the problem. So you've just now put an employee who's probably one of your really star performers who finally asked for something that they needed, who's probably in burnout or heading into burnout. And then you're making them continue to struggle because you don't have a solution in place. You don't know how to respond. You don't have a plan, or you're not sure how to do it because of the risk management side of things, the legal ramifications, because you're not sure of that. The NeuroDrive team actually helps you do that. So let's talk about these things. Let's not be afraid. I mean, we can get comfortable with being uncomfortable, but let's look at why are we doing it in the first place? What are these needs and accommodations? So ladies, I would love to sort of wrap up as we move into the last question here. How do we, as the curator or designer of an office environment or a public space, begin to look for what might be a challenge for different groups? How do we as individuals begin to have our needs met? So we've touched on this a little bit, but let's just kind of like from the company perspective, let's start there. How do we start creating this space? What do we do first? I mean, Emily, I think you kind of touched on it, but is it simply starting a conversation? And if so, how do we start that conversation?
Yeah, I think there is definitely around the line of starting that conversation. Apologies, I've gone really dark. I can honestly say it's not genuinely that late in the UK. I don't know why it's gone so dark. Yeah, so starting those conversations, asking those questions, and just, being honest about it. There's kind of equality, diversity, and inclusion teams, people within organizations and companies in the UK. Ask those questions, ask people to come along and kind of, be open, have an honest discussion. Or if you are somebody who thinks, do you know what, I've had a few people say that these things are a bit difficult. One morning, go into the office a bit earlier, create the environment that would normally be there minus all the people, and just listen. Can you hear background noises? Is there lots of light sources? Count how many light sources are around you. Is there a lot on the walls to overstimulate? Just have a think. You may not, be kind of neurodivergent yourself, but actually just take note of just how, because I'm like so many people who come up to me and go, oh, well, I'm definitely neurotypical, but I've noticed this, there might be an issue. And it's like, brilliant, you've noticed it. Just take that time to notice it. And actually, if you're noticing it, you're getting that feedback from others. Surely that's enough of it. You've got to be a really good company leader to do that, I will say. But yeah, just go in, stay a bit later, go in a bit earlier, just experience what your workplace is like. And that could be, a shop, it could be a museum. Personally, museums before they're open are the best places I've ever been in. So maybe don't do it in a museum because that's amazing. Do that when it's open. But yeah, everywhere else, kind of experience it before there's anyone else in there. Because you will find, if you're not particularly sensitive to noise, if it's a busy environment anyway, you won't notice those ticking clocks. You might not notice the fridge that buzzes. You might not notice kind of just how loud the doorbell is when people come in, or when just notice those things. Make a checklist. What can I see? What can I hear? What can, try, get around the space and see how many things you notice, because I think most people would be surprised by just how many things you experience. Like, how many different textures do I have to experience in this office? like, what are the social norms in this office? How many people would normally be in this space? Almost question yourself and ask other people as well.
Oh, wow. Such great insights. Thank you, Emily. So Carrin, on the accommodation side of things, both formal and self, one of the things that we talk about in the NeuroDrive team is that, there has to be, and Emily just touched on this, there has to be leadership in this. And that's one of the things that we help coach on, to help leaders learn how and to get comfortable being uncomfortable with starting some of these decisions and leading these conversations. And I think one of the things that we come back to a lot is, for ourselves, just starting these conversations, is that psychological safety. How do we start that in our environment, within our teams, to create these conversations to where we feel like we can have these conversations? Where do we start to build in that psychological safety, Carrin?
Stating intentions. I think stating your intention is huge. Whether or not you are a manager or you are the employee, you're a teacher, educator, secretary, the big CEO, intention is key. I've had the honor of working with many different types of bosses, whether it be my husband who runs a, place, or, I'm working on a new DEI committee where we're working with one of the high up people in the company. The intention is key. And that is something people forget a lot. If you have an intention that you want to make your workplace better, you got to take the feedback. And I always love when people ask about accommodations, because they always feel bad. I'm like, no, let's talk. And so creating that safe place is creating an intention.
Oh, we froze for a sec there. Oh no. But I think, that is such a big part of it. It's just setting our intention, saying, this is what we're thinking. And I think that that's, especially for
You
those of
create a
us.
survey.
There we go. Hey, you froze.
Oh no, I'm so
Yes, we
sorry.
probably just lost some great genius stuff there.
I'll repeat it. Honestly, I was
Yes.
saying intentions and surveys. A company can always do a quick survey, right? Boom. What is accommodation your employees wish they had? We've gotten so much feedback from that one. I've gotten so many DMs about it, like from even high up people in the company, not even just the low. Everyone's like, oh, well, of course the employees. No, I've had like a couple of bosses and business managers come into my DMs being like, I wish we could do this. And I know a lot of bosses and managers too, which is kind of the fun part. So I think that doing a survey of your company, making it anonymity a part of that. So there is no repercussion, because I can tell you people want to give the feedback, but they are terrified of losing their jobs. I always make the joke, as an autistic person, when my needs aren't met, I have to vocalize it, because mine are so very unable to be hidden. That I always lose my job. Like, I always have to think, well, if I vocalize this, I'll lose my job. And that's not okay. So that normalization of being at fault for having feedback. So that's why I said the intention, right? The intention of the employee giving the feedback is to better the company, not to be like a big middle finger also. So I think intention is something everyone could work on. And then making sure there's conversation after, right? You can't just do a survey and then nothing is done. So I would say intention, conversation, no punitive punishment, and then actionable items, small bite-sized ones. I can't tell you how excited the teachers were about Google, right? It's an action item. We're going to use Google. So I think that just remembering that, and then it's an award when you do an action item too. Another place I'm working at, we're trying to add pronouns to all of our Zoom meetings, or sorry, we use Microsoft Team meetings there, right? So just remembering that, these are actionable small bite-sized pieces in the states that a lot of DEI committees can do that aren't that hard, but create a sense of community. And that's the ultimate goal. If you have a sense of belonging at your workplace, God, there was a Forbes article I read that was 50% of employees are not engaged in their work. They said when 20% feel a sense of belonging in their workplace. If you do not love your job, And if you do not like the place you work, you're not going to put your heart in nor work hard. So I think that with COVID, the great exodus, right, like of people right now, people across like whether or not you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, our needs are not being met. So I think this is an opportunity for businesses to do what's called carpe diem, seize that moment and really bring it up, and be like, hey, I'm going to honor this. I'm going to be the business that honors your needs. And you're going to become the more and more profitable businesses, because that is what people are looking for. So that's my cycle of it all, right? You have accommodations, and it's like, how do you get their needs met? Then people don't have burnout. It's just a really, I would say, like, you're like the reason why I need accommodations, right? Like people need accommodations. So remember that, like, accommodations can help people's needs be met. And then look at all the amazing things that happen when people's needs are met.
Now that is exactly what we're looking for right there. What are the amazing things? What are the possibilities? And as Robin Sharma says, I love it. This is my favorite term. And I am the possibilitarian. How can we all become possibilitarians? Because what is truly possible when we are all being supported in the very best way, so that we get in those flow states, we're in those amazing, innovative, creative generation where we are like throwing out amazing ideas, and we're solving problems faster, and we're predicting what's going to happen so that we can avoid those things in the future altogether that we may be hitting with a project. But we don't get to that place without conversation, which is what we've had here today. And thank you so much for everybody that's here live in the chat box. I've been loving the conversation and the comments going by. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us to talk today about, sort of as Emily mentioned, the elephant in the room for a lot of us, the accommodation term, and those reasonable accommodation terminologies in particular. Guys, one that we did, the NeuroDrive team, we have an anonymous survey that we put up for all of the employees who attend our training events. And we get, as Carrin mentioned, phenomenal feedback, and feedback from every level within an organization, from the mailroom up to the C-suite. We get feedback, especially around what would you wish your workplace would provide that would make work for you so much easier? Or what's one thing that you have noticed makes a difference in your life and makes work so much more enjoyable? Because let's face it, we have, over the last 2 years, the Great Resignation hit hard. We were talking a ton about retention rates. And when we're talking about retention, we're talking about employee well-being. We're talking about people feeling that they are being seen, heard, valued, and understood. And when you are looking at how can I as a company, how can I as an individual, how can I as a boss, how can I as a coworker, as a team member, as a mom, as a parent, as a partner in a relationship, because guys, this just isn't happening in the worst place. This filters to your home life. And when we just start shifting and thinking about these things in this way, we're not just changing our work environments, we're changing our home environment, and we're changing the world. We are possibilitarians together. Emily, Carrin, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing your insight, your zone of genius, your knowledge, and the amazing things that you are doing in the world for accommodation, accessibility, and needs. Emily, where do you want people to find you? Where can they reach out to you if they have got a public space over in the UK and they would love for you to come and take a look and help them see how can we make this more accessible? How can we make this a better environment for everyone? Where do they find you?
So probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. So if you search for Emily Elsworth on LinkedIn, or check out my website, which is emilyautism.co.uk.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And you can find Carrin, Gilmore, and myself, Carole Jean Whittington, at mindyourautisticbrain.com. We are also on LinkedIn at Mind Your Autistic Brain. The NeuroDrive team has their own page. There's all kinds of events, and everything this month in Autistics in the Workforce is going through our NeuroDrive page. All of the events were there. Mind Your Autistic Brain also has our own separate events page. So if you just need it all in one place, it's all on one page and you don't want to have to like go find an event, I get you. I'm accommodating that as well. So hop on over to resources.autisticbrain/events page. We are so excited that you are here, that you are part of this conversation happening this month. And don't forget, we're going to be releasing that amazing video campaign, Autistics in the Workforce. You are going to be blown away. We are not just in tech, folks. We are everywhere. We have got people in every aspect of work, and they showed up to share with us, and that's going to be coming out later this month. Thanks for being here. Our live event is going to be all about communication in the workplace next week with Miss Jamie A. Heidel, who is the articulate autistic, and she is the translation director of the NeuroDrive team, and Dr. Ali Arena of Arena Communications, and she is our communications director in the NeuroDrive team. We are going to be breaking down communication, translation, and all things connection in the workforce next week. See you there, guys. Thanks for being here.